Let's start with Biomutant. Picture this, a post-apocalyptic open world, but it's not bleak and gray. Nope, Biomutant flips the script, throwing you into this lush, colorful environment that's teeming with life, strange creatures, and a real sense of wonder. You play as this adorable, yet totally fierce, mutant critter who's out there saving, or maybe even reshaping, the world. And every choice you make has an impact. One of the coolest things about Biomutant is the customization. Right from the start, you're in charge of creating your little mutant warrior. The game has this whole DNA slider system, where you can adjust your character's appearance and abilities, so you could end up with a tiny, super intelligent creature, or a big, tough warrior. And as you play, the choices just keep coming. You'll be picking abilities, powers, and weapons that totally change up your playstyle. I mean, you're out here in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, wielding crazy cool weapons and mutant powers that make you feel like a total hero, or anti-hero, depending on how you play it. The combat is another big highlight. It's a mix of martial arts, gunplay, and mutant abilities, which gives it this flow that's just so fun. One minute you're dodging around, pulling off crazy combos, and the next you're launching mutant powers to take down enemies in style. And since the world is filled with wacky enemies, the combat is always interesting and varied. You can customize weapons and gear too, so if you want to roll up with a giant custom-made sword or a cobbled-together blaster, go for it. Next we have Towers of Aghasba. One of the coolest things about Towers of Aghasba is how it lets you create your own world. You're not just exploring, you're shaping the environment to reflect your imagination. Whether you're constructing intricate towers, crafting cozy little villages, or experimenting with how nature and your structures interact, there's this incredible sense of ownership over what you create. I spent way too much time perfecting the layout of one area because I wanted the perfect balance between nature and architecture. And the game doesn't just hand you a checklist of places to go or things to find. Instead, it nudges you to venture out and discover on your own. And trust me, it's worth it. There's something so refreshing about a game that rewards curiosity without making you feel rushed. I found myself wandering off the beaten path just to see what was over the next hill or hidden in a dense forest. And the surprises? Let's just say this world has a way of keeping you on your toes. What really makes the building system stand out is how it blends with the game's overall vibe. It's not about grinding resources endlessly or following a rigid plan. It's about creativity and flow. You're encouraged to experiment, and the tools the game gives you make it feel intuitive and fun. Plus, seeing your structures come to life in this vibrant world is so satisfying. Towers of Aghasba is the kind of game that feels like a breath of fresh air. It's relaxing yet engaging, and most importantly, it gives you the freedom to play your way. Next we have Supernormal. It stands out as a game heavily influenced by classic psychological horror, paying homage to titles like PT and Allison Road. The game puts you in the shoes of Wyatt, an investigator poking around in the stylish, almost too clean home of Mr. Sakamoto. You're trying to figure out what happened to his daughter, Sophia, and as you explore, things get weird. You'll see blood splattered on pianos, bloody handprints in the bathroom, and the ever-charming pile of laundry with a pistol just casually lying next to it. Typical, right? It's the kind of setup that makes you feel like something's off from the get-go. The house itself is what really makes Supernormal work. It's one of those places that feels unsettling even when nothing's happening. You hear the house creak, footsteps that might not be yours, and other weird noises that make you question if you're really alone. You're following these blood trails and strange sounds, trying to piece together the horror that went down here, and slowly but surely, the creepy vibe ramps up. Now, for the cool part, there's a voice recognition system built into the game. You can supposedly ask the spirit questions like, "Where are you?" or "Can you see me?" using your mic. In theory, this should make the game even more immersive, but in practice, it doesn't always work as well as you'd hope. Still, the idea is awesome, and when it does work, it adds an extra layer of tension to your ghostly interactions. Next we have Journey. Journey isn't here to lecture you or make you solve impossible puzzles. Instead, it's all about the simple joy of exploration and connection, with a little mystery sprinkled in for good measure. This is a quiet, reflective kind of adventure, where every step feels like it has meaning. You start as a cloaked figure standing in the middle of a vast desert, and ahead of you in the distance is a mountain. That's it. Your goal is clear. Reach that mountain. But how you get there and what you discover along the way is where the magic happens. What makes Journey special is its simplicity. There's no clutter, no endless menus, no complicated mechanics, no overwhelming tutorials. The game trusts you to figure things out as you go, and it's designed in a way that feels completely natural. You move, you explore, and you interact with the world in a way that feels intuitive. Even if you're new to games, it's almost like the game is gently guiding you without ever making it obvious. One of the coolest things about Journey is how it handles connection. At some point during your playthrough, you might notice another figure wandering the desert. A figure just like you. This isn't an NPC or a random AI. It's another player, somewhere out in the world, experiencing the same journey you are. You don't know their name, you can't send them messages, and there's no chat box. Instead, you communicate in the simplest way possible, through actions and little chirps of sound. Next, we have House of Ashes. It's not just a game you play, it's a game that plays you. It constantly throws you into high-stakes situations where you're not just fighting for survival, but also trying to keep your relationships intact. And let me tell you, balancing those two, way harder than it sounds. The gameplay here is a mix of exploration, quick-time events, and decision-making that feels so personal you might find yourself second-guessing every move. It's not just about reflexes or strategy, it's about weighing your gut instinct against the little voice in your head, saying, "This is probably a terrible idea." The best part? You never really know if you made the right call until it's too late. That constant tension is what makes every moment so engaging. One of the coolest things about House of Ashes is how it makes you feel like the director of your own horror movie. Every choice you make feels impactful, shaping the way the story unfolds and determining who makes it out alive. It's a game that doesn't shy away from consequences. Mess up, and you'll know it. But even when things go sideways, the game leans into those moments so hard that you'll still feel like you're on an incredible ride. The game throws together a group of people who couldn't be more different if they tried. And it forces you to figure out how to handle them. Do you trust them? Do you argue? Do you try to be the peacemaker? It's all up to you, and that's where a lot of the fun comes in. Every conversation feels like a tiny puzzle, and how you handle it can completely change the dynamics of the group. Next, we have Ghost of a Tale. Imagine stepping into a world where you play as a little mouse named Tilo, a minstrel with a big heart and a knack for sneaking around. This is a game where charm and danger walk hand in hand, and it's absolutely magical. And speaking of being tiny, that's where the real fun begins. You're not some overpowered hero here. You're small, vulnerable, and, well, adorable. But don't let that fool you. Tilo's resourcefulness is what makes him stand out. The game is all about using your wits to outsmart enemies and navigate the world, and that sense of being the underdog makes every victory feel so much sweeter. The stealth mechanics are at the heart of the gameplay. As Tilo, you'll spend a lot of time sneaking past guards, hiding in barrels, and darting through shadows to avoid being spotted. It's tense, but never overly punishing. You're always encouraged to think creatively, whether that's distracting enemies with objects, learning their patrol routes, or even donning disguises to blend in. There's a real sense of satisfaction when you successfully slip past a heavily guarded area without getting caught. One of the coolest things about Ghost of a Tale is how much freedom you're given to explore. The game's world may not be massive, but it's packed with hidden paths, secret areas, and collectibles that reward curiosity. You're constantly encouraged to look around, experiment, and try new things. And that sense of discovery is one of the game's biggest joys. It's a game about sneaking, exploring, and solving problems. Next we have Denotria: The Last Song. A game that brings the soul of Italy to life with every detail, where you're not just playing a character, but exploring a world steeped in folklore, history, and vibrant culture. The combat is an absolute blast. Denotria blends fast-paced action with a bit of tactical thought. You're not just mashing buttons or hacking away mindlessly. There's a rhythm and flow to it, almost like a dance. The mechanics feel responsive and tight, rewarding both skill and timing. And each enemy encounter feels different enough to keep you on your toes. 1 minute, you're squaring off against a creature straight out of a folktale, and the next, you're strategizing how to use the environment to your advantage. The variety keeps things interesting, and it's easy to lose track of time just enjoying the rhythm of combat. There's also a big focus on discovery. Denotria isn't about rushing from one objective to the next. It's about taking the time to get lost in its world. There are secrets to find, hidden paths to explore, and layers to uncover, making you feel like every corner could hold a new surprise. It's got that adventure vibe that so many games miss, and the game rewards you for being curious, taking those detours and soaking it all in. And the story, it's got this mystical quality that pulls you in, but without overwhelming you. You're not bombarded with endless lore dumps. Instead, you gradually uncover the history, culture, and myths that shape Enotria. Next we have Witchfire. It's one of those games that makes you feel like an absolute badass. You're not just blasting enemies with guns, though the guns are fantastic. You're combining that with spellcasting. It's like Doom met Dark Souls, and decided to throw in a pinch of Harry Potter for good measure. You're weaving between foes, firing off rounds, dodging attacks, and unleashing devastating magical abilities. It's fast, fluid, and so satisfying when you get into the rhythm. The combat has this amazing flow to it. It's not about running and guns blazing. Okay, maybe sometimes it is, but about learning enemy patterns and figuring out how to counter them. Every encounter feels like a little puzzle you're solving in real time, and when you pull it off, you feel unstoppable. What's cool is how it gives you the freedom to play your way. Are you a long-range sniper kind of player? Go for it. Prefer getting up close with devastating spells and melee attacks? You can do that too. The weapons and abilities are varied enough that experimenting feels rewarding, and I found myself switching up my style just because I wanted to try something new. And let's not forget the enemies. These guys aren't your average cannon fodder. They're smart, relentless, and creepy in the best way possible. Some of them will straight up hunt you down, while others require you to think on your feet to take them out. The first time I ran into a particularly nasty foe, I panicked, flailed around, and then somehow survived by the skin of my teeth. It was equal parts terrifying and thrilling, and I loved every second of it. Next we have High on Life. This is not your average shooter, not even close. The big hook here is the talking guns. They've got personality, sass, and opinions. They'll comment on everything you're doing, sometimes cheering you on, sometimes calling you out for being, let's say, less than stellar at aiming. It's like having a running commentary, but instead of a silent protagonist, your sidekicks are straight up roasting you or dropping the most bizarre one-liners. And the humor? Oh man, it's unapologetically ridiculous. This game was cooked up by the minds behind Rick and Morty, and it shows. You've got weird alien creatures, crazy scenarios, and a sense of humor that swings wildly between sharp satire and goofy chaos. Now, you might be wondering, does all that comedy get in the way of the gameplay? Not at all. At its core, High on Life is still a solid first-person shooter with smooth mechanics and satisfying gunplay. The weapons each have unique abilities that keep combat fresh and exciting. Whether you're bouncing around like a maniac or pulling off precise shots, the game gives you the tools to feel like you're doing something impressive, even when the dialogue insists on making you laugh about it. What makes High on Life stand out is how fully committed it is to being absurd. It's not just about shooting bad guys. It's about doing it in a way that makes you laugh so hard you almost forget you're actually fighting for something. You'll stumble into moments where you'll pause and think, wait, did that just happen? And yeah, it did. The game thrives on unpredictability. It's the kind of experience where you don't want to rush. Next we have Immortals of Aveum. If you're tired of the usual swords, guns, or bows and arrows, then this game is going to feel like a breath of magical fresh air. It's a first-person shooter, but instead of the usual arsenal, you're slinging spells. Think of it like wielding a high-octane magic bazooka in each hand, but with finesse and strategy thrown into the mix. At its core, Immortals of Aveum takes you into a world where magic isn't just some mystical force. It's woven into every aspect of life. It's called the Everwar, and magic is both the weapon and the battlefield. You play as a battle mage, someone who can manipulate this raw energy and turn it into a spectacular display of destruction and precision. You're not just surviving in this world, you're shaping it, one well-placed spell at a time. The coolest thing about this game, the combat. This isn't a game where you're just mindlessly casting the same spell over and over again. Oh no, Immortals of Aveum makes you feel like a true master of magic. You've got 3 types of magic, blue, red, and green. And each one has its own vibe. Blue magic is your precision weapon, like a sniper spell for picking off enemies from afar. Red magic, pure explosive chaos. And green magic, fast, tricky, and perfect for keeping your enemies guessing. What makes the gameplay really shine is how you combine these magical abilities. So, if you've been craving a game that takes the familiar mechanics of a shooter and flips them into something fresh, magical, and downright exhilarating, Immortals of Avium is an absolute must-play. Next we have Psychonauts 2. It's the kind of game that takes everything you think you know about how games work and flips it on its head. Every step you take in this game feels like entering a world that's completely its own, full of imagination and creativity that you don't see every day. At its core, Psychonauts 2 is about exploring minds. Yes, minds. Your job is to delve into people's brains, unravel their mental struggles, and set things right. But this isn't a grim or heavy game. It's hilarious, playful, and filled with moments that'll leave you shaking your head, thinking, did they really just do that? The big draw here is the level design. When I say the levels in Psychonauts 2 are unlike anything you've seen, I mean it. Each mind you explore is a reflection of the person it belongs to, so no two areas are alike. One minute, you're walking through a metaphorical manifestation of someone's deepest fears. The next, you're running around a mind that looks like a neon-soaked dreamscape. It's like every level is its own self-contained world, with mechanics and themes tailored to that specific character's psyche. And let me just say, Psychonauts 2 nails the balance between being weird and being accessible. Sure, it's wild and over the top, but it always gives you the tools you need to navigate its craziness. You'll get access to a bunch of psychic abilities like telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and levitation, and each one feels useful and fun in its own way. Exploration in Psychonauts 2 is also a treat. Next we have Death in the Water 2. In this game, you're diving into the vast unknown, and trust me, the unknown doesn't stay unknown for long. The waters are teeming with life, some of it stunning, and some of it, well, let's just say it's better off left unseen. But seeing is part of the game, and so is fighting. You'll have to navigate through the murky depths, armed with your wits and whatever equipment you can get your hands on. What's unique about this game is how it blends exploration with danger. It's not just about floating around and admiring the underwater world. It's about constantly staying on edge. The ocean feels alive, like it's watching you, waiting for you to make one wrong move. It's all about balancing the thrill of discovery with the constant tension of what might be lurking just out of sight. Imagine trying to fend off a predator while underwater. Everything is slower, heavier, and more deliberate. It's not like battling on land. You have to adapt to the environment, anticipate your enemies, and keep your cool when things go south. And they will go south often, but that's what makes it so exciting. Every encounter feels like a fight for survival, and every victory feels hard-earned. The pacing of the game is something special too. You'll find yourself exploring serene, almost tranquil areas, only to have the peace shattered by something terrifying. It's like the game knows exactly when to ease you into a false sense of security and when to pull the rug out from under you. That unpredictability keeps you hooked, making every dive feel like a new challenge. Next we have Wild Hearts. If you're into action-packed gameplay with a side of creativity, this game has so much to offer. One of the standout features of Wild Hearts is how it blends fast-paced action with thoughtful planning. The combat is exhilarating. It's all about timing, movement, and making the most of your arsenal. But it's not just about swinging weapons around. There's a real depth here, with mechanics that reward skill and experimentation. The more you dive into the systems, the more rewarding it gets. Speaking of mechanics, the game gives you some seriously cool tools to work with. Without giving too much away, let's just say you've got plenty of options for creativity during battles. Whether you're crafting clever solutions on the fly, or using unique gadgets to gain the upper hand, it's all about thinking outside the box. These tools aren't just gimmicks, they're integral to how you play, and they add a fresh layer of strategy to every encounter. The gameplay loop in Wild Hearts is super satisfying. It strikes that perfect balance between challenge and reward, so you always feel like you're making progress, even when things get tough. There's a sense of accomplishment when you figure out the best way to tackle a tough enemy or complete a tricky task. And the game does a great job of giving you new challenges to keep things exciting, so it never feels like you're just going through the motions. Another thing that really stands out is how fluid and responsive the controls feel. Every action, from dodging to attacking to using your tools, feels natural and precise. That precision is key when you're in the middle of a heated battle. Next we have War of Rights. It's a Civil War FPS that focuses heavily on teamwork and strategy. At first I thought it would just be another typical shooter, but the attention to detail is something else. Like, you don't just run around with a gun. You're part of a company, and you actually need to coordinate with your team to survive. You're not a lone wolf here. It's almost like being on an actual battlefield, with that chaos and intensity all around you. The first time I joined a battle, I was a little overwhelmed, to be honest. You've got dozens of players on each side, all in uniform, marching in formation, and you can hear officers barking out orders. It's kind of amazing how much that atmosphere pulls you in. You're really part of something bigger, which you don't get in most games. And speaking of orders, this game really forces you to think before you act. There's no sprinting across the map and gunning people down here. You have to stick with your squad, follow orders, and time your moves carefully. It's like a slower pace, but in the best way possible. It makes every decision count. One thing I love is that you're encouraged to communicate. And I'm talking real communication, not just trash talk. You actually need to speak to your fellow soldiers to succeed. It reminds me of those old-school LAN parties where you had to talk to each other to win. I've met some cool people just from having to strategize mid-battle. I also appreciate how historically accurate everything is. The developers really did their homework. The uniforms, the weapons, the way the battles play out, it's like a playable history lesson. Next we have Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. If you've played the original, you already know how special it is. But this remake? It somehow takes that emotional journey and makes it even more impactful. The core of the game remains the same. You're controlling two brothers on a quest to save their father. But the visual and gameplay enhancements in the remake make it feel even more immersive and engaging. The puzzles and challenges you face along the way are simple, but satisfying. Most of them revolve around using the brothers' different abilities. The older brother is stronger, while the younger one is more agile. But what makes them interesting is how they force you to think about the brothers as a team. One of the standout features of Brothers is its unique control scheme, where you control both brothers simultaneously using one controller. It sounds tricky at first, but you quickly get the hang of it, and it's such a clever way to tell this story. The older brother is controlled with one thumbstick, and the younger brother with the other, which creates this sense of connection between them. You're not just watching their bond. You're physically controlling it, which makes the emotional beats hit even harder. What I love about this game is how it tells its story without using any real dialogue. Everything is conveyed through body language, facial expressions, and the way the brothers interact with the world. It's so effective, and it proves that you don't need tons of exposition to tell a deeply emotional story. You're not just playing a game, you're living through these brothers' journey. Overall, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons in its remake form is a must-play. Next we have Chernobylite. It's this mix of survival, horror, and sci-fi, and the whole thing takes place in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Right off the bat, the atmosphere is insane. You can really feel the tension in the air, like the zone is alive and just waiting to mess with you. The game puts you in the shoes of this scientist who's come back to Chernobyl to uncover some personal mysteries. And honestly, that plot hooked me right away. It's not just about surviving. You're driven by this deeper story, and it keeps you curious about what's going on beneath the surface. Every time I thought I had it figured out, something would happen to throw me off. One thing that really stood out to me is how immersive the world feels. The developers did an amazing job recreating the Chernobyl zone, and it's kind of eerie how real it feels. The abandoned buildings, the overgrown forests, the radiation hotspots. It's all so atmospheric. You'll be creeping through these dark, crumbling hallways, and the tension just builds. You never know what's waiting around the corner, and that unpredictability is what keeps you on edge. The gameplay itself is a mix of exploration, survival, and combat. But there's also a base-building element, which I didn't expect at first. You're not just scavenging for resources. You're also building up your base, crafting weapons, and planning your next moves. It's a cool balance between being out in the field and coming back to your base to regroup and strategize. Speaking of survival, it's no joke. You've got to manage your health, your team, your supplies. It really makes you think about your next steps. It's got this perfect blend of tension, exploration, and mystery. Next we have Unknown 9: Awakening. It's about the idea that we as humans are capable of so much more than we know, that hidden powers or deeper connections might just be waiting to be unlocked. In Unknown 9, you get to explore that concept in ways that feel both grounded and extraordinary. You play as Haruna, someone who isn't just uncovering the mysteries of the world around her, but also the mysteries within herself. There's a constant sense of what if woven into the gameplay, and it doesn't let go. The narrative invites you to question everything, to peek behind the curtain of reality, and to lean into the unknown. One of the most striking things about Unknown 9 is how much it respects your intelligence as a player. This isn't a game that spoon-feeds you answers or drags you along by the hand. Instead, it encourages curiosity. It's like the developers knew we all had that kid in us, the one who used to ask why 1,000 times a day. Playing this game feels like rediscovering that mindset. You're solving puzzles, sure, but it's more than that. You're unraveling layers, piecing together clues that challenge your perception of what's possible. The gameplay mechanics are an experience in themselves. You're not just running and jumping through obstacles. You're engaging with an ability called Fold. It's a unique system that lets you interact with the unseen, literally bending reality in a way that feels incredibly satisfying. And no, I'm not going to tell you exactly how it works. That's for you to uncover. Next we have System Shock Remake. This is one of those classic games reborn with all the bells and whistles of modern gaming, but it still holds on to everything that made the original a cult favorite. So right out of the gate, you're tossed into this futuristic nightmare on Citadel Station, where things have gone very, very wrong. The game doesn't waste any time throwing you into this dark, eerie setting, and it has a way of making you feel like you're truly isolated in space. The gameplay really makes you think. You're not just running and gunning here. You're using your brain just as much as your trigger finger. There are puzzles to solve, computers to hack, and systems to figure out, which makes you feel like a real hacker, trying to survive against impossible odds. It's honestly kind of refreshing to play a game that doesn't hold your hand. Instead, it encourages you to explore, experiment, and trust your instincts. And when you finally solve a puzzle or hack a terminal, there's this great sense of accomplishment. Combat in System Shock Remake is intense and requires some strategy. This isn't a game where you can just blast your way through enemies and call it a day. You have to think about your resources, manage your ammo, and even figure out how to approach each enemy. The station is crawling with all sorts of bizarre, horrifying creatures, and each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. The remake also adds a layer of accessibility that's perfect for newcomers while keeping the complexity that old fans love. It's clear the developers wanted to honor the original while making it smoother to play by modern standards. Next we have Death's Door. This isn't just another action-adventure game, it's a journey filled with quirky humor, unexpected beauty, and a story that hits all the right notes without overwhelming you. Plus, you get to play as a crow. Yes, a sword-wielding, tiny, feathery reaper. And honestly, that's reason enough to dive in. You're a crow working as a reaper for the Bureaucratic Commission of Death. Your job is to collect souls. But, as you can imagine, things don't go quite as planned. The result? You're thrust into a mysterious world full of danger, intrigue, and plenty of darkly comedic moments. And despite the game's title, the tone is never too heavy. It strikes this perfect balance between melancholy and whimsy. The combat is tight, responsive, and wonderfully satisfying. You'll be slashing, dodging, and casting spells in a rhythm that feels smooth and natural. It's not overly complicated, but that's what makes it so fun. You can focus on the flow of the fight without being bogged down by mechanics. And the enemies? Oh, they're as creative as they are challenging. Each encounter feels different, with unique attack patterns that keep you on your toes. It's never frustrating, though. It's the kind of challenge that makes you want to jump back in and try again. Boss battles, in particular, are a highlight. They're big, bold, and beautifully designed, but they also feel fair. Every victory feels earned, and every defeat feels like a lesson learned. The pacing of the game is just right, too. It never feels like it's dragging, and it never overwhelms you with too much at once. Next we have Unholy. Unholy is all about balance, balancing tension with exploration, stealth with strategy, and action with moments where you just need to stop and think. It's got this really neat flow, where every challenge feels like it's testing a different part of your skill set. The stealth mechanics are so good. The game gives you plenty of tools to sneak around, and it's really satisfying to figure out the best way to move through an area. It's not just about staying out of sight, it's about thinking ahead, being creative, and making the most out of the tools at your disposal. And let's be real, there's nothing quite as rewarding as successfully sneaking past a threat without getting caught. And then there are the puzzles. If you love a good brain teaser, you're in for a treat. The puzzles in Unholy aren't just thrown in for the sake of it. They're thoughtfully designed to make you feel clever when you solve them. They encourage you to pay attention, think outside the box, and experiment. Plus, they're integrated so seamlessly into the game that they never feel out of place. One thing that really stands out is how interactive the game feels. Everything in Unholy is deliberate, and every action you take seems to have weight. Whether you're using your abilities to solve a tricky problem, or carefully planning your next move to avoid danger, there's this constant sense of immersion. The game really nails that you are in this world feeling. What makes Unholy so engaging is its ability to keep you curious.